turn it over to Corey Pitzer. And so if you're looking to put on a virtual conference, invite 5,000 of your closest friends and make a really, really big impression, you're going to want to sign up Corey Pitzer to be your title speaker. Fortunately for you, you get to see him today. Unfortunately, we've signed him to a 100-year exclusive agreement, so he can only do virtual events with Safeopedia and SafetyCONNECT. But we're bringing him to you today. So it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce Corey Pitzer. He's the CEO and founder of SafeMap International, a company specializing in the psychology of risk. He is highly known and regarded in his work as an international consultant to many corporations in mining, utility, military defense, and construction, all with occupations in which people can be seriously injured or suffer fatalities. I'm not allowed to say which companies, but some of them go into outer space. Some of them go miles into the ground. Super interesting, high risk work. What some of you might not know about Corey is he was an infantry platoon commander, underground miner, and he's done every single dirty job you can imagine to fund his studies. When he's not working, he really likes to enjoy a lot of low risk activities like skydiving, motorcycling, and race car driving. In fact, some joke with Corey that he might know more about the risk side than the safety side. So without further ado, Corey Pitzer.
The topic that I'm going to discuss with you today is an absolute jam-packed session. This is about latent triggers of disasters, and they may be alive and deep inside your company. Now, each one of those words, latent, triggers, disasters, alive, deep, have got so much meaning to it, so much complexity to it. But I got an hour and I'm going to try and jam pack some stuff into you in this next hour about the magic and the science of latent triggers. So let's start with the magic. So I'm going to show you a card trick. And here's what you got to do. You got to watch the cards and select one card only, and keep it in your mind. Don't let it go out of your mind. I'll show you what happens with it. And here they come. Select one card only. Keep it in your head. Keep that card in your head. Don't forget it. And then it comes back. Voila, your card is missing. Well, science or magic? Well, I'm going to share with you today what I call the coefficient of chronic unease. This is the result of many, many years of research, and especially came to fruition in the last year. I'll tell you the story. But instead of just going into this, explaining the coefficient of chronic unease, I'm going to actually let you do it. You're going to assess your organization to see to what extent do you have these latent triggers in your organization. So what we're going to do, and Scott will paste a link into the chat box. So you've got to open the chat, but don't open it yet, because let me first show you what we're going to do. You're going to open up in a screen, and the screen will ask you, what is your job level? Quickly do that. Just select one of those. The next screen, if you click next at the bottom of your screen, of your survey, you're going to ask you what you spent most of your effort in on safety. Is it on action investigations, audits, complying, leadership? Where does your most effort go into? So this is an important one. Then you go to the next one, you select one of those, you select what is your safety performance in your organization from your perspective. Do you think you're ahead of other companies? Are you behind? Are you best in class, etc.? You select one again. Then at the bottom of your screen, go to next, and then lastly, you select your industry. And we only got 6 there. If it's not there, select other, and just quickly type in what is your industry that you're from. But here's the thing. You're going to see these 3 choices each time. There are going to be 7 of them. All you got to do each time is select which one of the 3 choices in blue best describe your company. 1, 2, or 3. Think about them, but don't overthink them. Just first, that's us. Click it, go to the next one, go to the next one. So you'll get the chat in the chat box. You must open the chat box to see the link, and there will be a URL link. If you have your cell phone handy, open your camera and point your camera to this QR code. It will open into the survey as well. So you've got two choices: either follow the URL link on the computer or laptop where you're now from, or use your camera for your phone to open this QR code. I think most people will be finished by now, and I'm going to start. So I want to start off by giving you a quick overview of a tragic accident that happened here in Canada. This is an accident happened in a little town in Quebec, and it is the town called La Mégantic. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's where it's situated. It is just over the border from Maine in the US, and it's a beautiful little town. Next to this town, a few kilometers away, a few miles away, a train was approaching. A normal train pulling fuel, large fuel tankers. And the train was coming to a halt near a little town called Nantes. And the engine driver of this train was changing shift. He was going to leave the train, and another driver is going to pick it up the next morning. Now, this was at 10:50 at night on the 5th of July. And as I said, shift change, and he's on a main line where they park this train. There's a sideline there, but they didn't, it wasn't in use. So also what is important is that this was standing on a gradient of 0.09%, not visible to the human eye. So there's a possibility the train can run away, but what they do is the driver sets air brakes. He lets the engine run, and he sets the air brakes on the whole system, and he mechanically locks in 7 brakes on 7 wagons. That's the standard procedure that they've always followed. And he gets off and he calls a cab, and the cab driver says to him he noticed oil on his windscreen when he picked him up, and the guy says, yes, there's some problem with the engine of this loco. It had been repaired some months ago, but it wasn't repaired correctly, and he's going to report it. So he reports it, and later that night, the loco started burning. A fire started on it. There's a 911 call on 11:30. The fire brigade arrives, and they shut the loco off in order to extinguish the fire. They do so, and they notify the company MMA at 12:30 that the engine is not running. But they're happy that the mechanical brakes will still be okay and hold it. Well, the air started to release from the air brake, and unfortunately, the wagon brakes started failing. All of them failed, one after the other, and the train started rolling at 12:56. And it was derailing at 63 miles an hour inside the town. I'll show you in a moment. And the thin tanker shells failed, and massive explosions occurred. And this is the process that it followed. Within minutes, the train hit the center of the town and exploded. It turned this little beautiful town into that. 47 people killed. This is a picture of the buildings in which people were sleeping that night, and this is the scene after that. In their sleep, didn't know what hit them. Now, of course, there was a massive outcry, a massive investigation. Now, what is not very well known is this is a picture of train lines full of cargo, pulling oil tankers as well, across North America every day. It's an incredibly busy line. And they focused on these factors that I just showed you that caused this accident. But this is not the only way in which an accident like this can happen. There are many other reasons that can cause catastrophic events, but they focused on the blue ones, and there's huge focus and effort on that. And then 6 months later, one of the other factors, the dormant ones, the latent ones, came into action. And it happened near Ottawa when a train at a normal intersection on the 18th of September clipped the front end of a bus and 6 people killed. If it was one fraction of a second later, 82 people would have been killed. Ironically, if it was one fraction of a second earlier, nothing would have happened. They would have watched the train go by. Now, this is an example of events that happen around the world. And I've done some separate presentations on this one. So I'll just go a quick recap. There are 27 cases like this in which over 6,000 people died in organizations that have been rated as safe. In fact, MMA, the rail company, declared before this accident that they are operating practically at zero. Well, there are many others that shared the Titanic-like unsinkable beliefs. Bhopal, India, Union Carbide, December 84, almost 4,000 people killed in a gas leak. Piper Alpha, the oil rig that burned, 167 people killed. 6 months before, it won a safety competition. BP, Texas refinery. In the Baker report, you'll see that it was rated a leading refinery in the Texas industry in safety. The Deepwater Horizon, Gulf of Mexico, 11 people killed. Transocean, known for its obsession with safety. DuPont, the famous safest company in the world, had a disaster in November 2014 in which 4 people were killed, a gas leak. These organizations all shared common characteristics. Safety was a core value in their organizations. They were fixated on compliance and elimination of at-risk behavior. They focused on safety in terms of technology, systems, audits, rule enforcement, and most importantly, they targeted and achieved low accident rates as a measure of safety and got nearer and nearer to zero. These were well-managed organizations that suddenly had massive disasters. How does this work? Why does it happen? Well, it has to do a lot with the way we celebrate safety, the way we celebrate achievements. We are very proud of what we achieve in safety. The 3 million man-hours, the 4 million man-hours. As we set these targets for our employees that we set up to work, and we protect them as best we can, and then our systems start to come into operation. The management objectives, we don't want any injuries. We don't zero accidents. The accident rate is coming down. We start to reward safe behaviors, and as we go forward and forward, slowly but surely we turn into quite a dogmatic organization. We then focus on zero deviance from our rules and regulations. We punish the at-risk behavior of people. We get into the mode of zero tolerance, and we start setting ourselves up with cardinal rules, and the organization becomes obsessive. And when we start to reward zero, long streaks of zero, the accident rates come down, and we see what I call the FIR. It's a new index that you haven't heard of. And the RIR is actually above that. The RIR is the real industry, the real injury rate. The FIR is the fake injury rate, because this is now what we achieve because people don't report anymore, because we have become obsessive. The organization has become gripped by fear. And this fear is driving a barrier into the organization. And this barrier only allows good news and distorted news to reach management. Management want to hear we are doing well. Bad news, things that go wrong, may go wrong, stay below this barrier. This is what we call risk secrecy. And each one of these 27 cases I've studied shared this problem. The manager of Piper Alpha emphatically said, I thought everything was okay because I never got a report anything was wrong. Now, if you have a look at the famous Hudson model of maturity, we've rewritten this model to show 6 levels, and there's a 7th level in our model. And what we notice from these analysis of these disastrous organizations is that they were all at least at this reliable level. They were highly functioning organizations with great focus on safety. So what happens? Well, when they get to this level of reliability, the organization, if they don't progress, if they become obsessed, if they become gripped by fear, they shift into a different kind of mode, a different kind of culture. The organization becomes constrained or restrained, becomes eventually deluded, and becomes eventually destructed. And these various levels, it's very clear in the case studies that I looked at, and the same in Latent, where they become rigid, risk secret, messengers are shot because they stay quiet, and workers are being distrusted. So, are these catastrophic events? Are these events just out of the blue? Well, there is a term that's been well known now, that's being used for this, and it's the so-called Black Swan event. And this has been developed by Nassim Taleb, very famous book, and an incredible read. But here's what the Black Swan theory is about. Since Roman times, people believed that swans are white. It was a truth. But then they found these black swans in Australia, in Western Australia. So they termed this as black swans are rare events. They have extreme impact. And then very importantly, they can only be predicted retrospectively, not prospectively. Well, there is an alternative theory. And this theory is developed by a Frenchman, Sonnet, and it's called the Dragon King. The Dragon King has got the difference that it is predictable. Now, Latent and many of those disasters that I just showed you were predictable. And they drifted into failure. So what is this predictability? This is like the golden, the holy grail in safety. If we can predict accidents, and we have this huge emphasis on big data now, artificial intelligence, it's like a buzzword now. We're going to one day predict accidents. Well, I don't think that this can ever happen in safety. We are dealt a set of cards, and the set of cards look like that. And it's not the 6 red hearts. It's not the 4 black spades. It is something out of the blue. But if you have a look at an example like this, this is an example of a mine. The structure in the back is the power generation plant. The structure in the front left over here is the air intake of this mine. It's an underground operation. 40 years, 0 fatal injuries on this mine. What we've discovered in one of our exercises and projects on this mine is that right in front of this air intake of the mine, they had a diesel tank, massive diesel tanks that fed the generation plant and the fuel bay. This data will never show in any data set on safety. You cannot use data in safety to predict it because we will never get to big data. But I made the call that the coefficient of chronic unease might be predictive. Well, I was challenged very much by a colleague of mine. Over the past 2 years, they contracted me in this company to help them with a process called the elimination of fatalities. And we went around all their sites. There are 40 sites around the world. And we spent a week on the site. And we worked in small teams. And in these small teams, we engaged with people very intensely, more than an hour, sometimes 2 hours, intensely working with them to chase potential fatal exposures. What we did is we took in this engagement, and we spoke to over 8,000 people. We had a lens that we call the 6Y lens, 6 Ys of risk engagement, and we used that to engage with people, and we took likelihood out of the equation. Don't care if it's likely or not. Is it possible? And we started working with employees and teams on site to identify these exposures. We also did a risk culture analysis while we were doing it, and we uncovered literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of these fatal risk exposures that were sitting there. Some quite imminent, some completely obsolete and unknown. This became to me early warning signals, and the term I use, latent triggers. Now, this colleague of mine, after we've done all this, said to me, he was challenged by his executives, can we not come up with some sort of an early warning signal system on this? And my first reaction was impossible. And then I started digging into this data, and the data became incredibly revealing. And this is what I then followed. We followed into the latent triggers, and we came up with this coefficient of chronic unease. And that's what I will share with you when we get there. So there are 3 types of cultures. There is what we call the system 1 culture. There is the system 2 culture, the restrained, deluded one. System 1 is the reactive one. And the system 3 is this advanced thinking that I will share with you in a moment. Now, what we've done in the survey that you've just completed, we looked at the level of risk transparency, we looked at the width of focus, depth of challenge, direction of rates. I'll explain all of these factors one by one. Level of risk transparency was the first one. Here's what we found in this analysis. You made a selection. We have very few, if any, near-miss reports. That's a system 1 organization that don't report anything or much. We have many near-miss reports and more than 3 hideable ones for every non-hideable one. I'll show you that in a moment. That's system 3. And system 2 is we have some near misses, and most are events that could not be hidden otherwise. So you've made a selection. Now, what we did find in the data of these fatal risk exposures, as there was a golden ratio. Now, you can Google the golden ratio on your own. That's the equation for it. But the golden ratio basically says nature exists in these ratios. This magic number of 1.618 exists in the proportions of our ears, our arms, the human body, in the roses, the petals of a rose. Even Apple has used this in their design, this specific golden ratio. And what this golden ratio is saying is contained in this little video clip. I'm going to show you some forklift accidents. Watch this guy. He pulls it away. And he nearly topples the shelves on top of him. Puts it back. No one knows about this. He's alone. He doesn't have to tell anybody, and he probably won't. Here's another forklift example. Taking it off this truck. And he just nearly slipped over and would have toppled and crushed this guy. Here's another one, and it's got all the fancy gizmos of lasers on it, everything. Guy gets on, starts it up, lasers come up, and nearly hits this guy. And then this one, also full of gizmos. That guy doesn't even blink. None of these will be reported because nothing happened. Here's another forklift accident. The guy barely touches the shelves and it comes crashing down. And it keeps on going. It doesn't stop. Well, they're not going to be able to hide this one. Everybody came out alive, but this is going to become a high potential incident reported. Now, this is important. What I've showed you now was this ratio that we found in this system 3 organizations. We have many near miss reports and more than 3 hideable ones for every non-hideable one. There is, for every 4 hideable ones, there is 1 non-hideable. So if you don't get the 4 hideable reports, you're not in system 3. Levels of width of safety risk focus. Now, what we do, and I'll show you the worst choice you could have made. Our focus is the prevention of all accidents. There's not a clear focus on risk that can kill people, serious injury, fatal and catastrophic risks. Now, what we do in the System 1 organizations is we install cardinal rules. That's the first attempt to focus on serious risk. Then we change it to a more positive statement as we move into the System 2 organizations, where we call them golden rules, or we even call them life-saving rules, so that it's very positive. But basically, it is a myopic, narrow focus on risk. The System 3 organizations, they develop risk registers of their serious injury and fatal risks. The resilient organizations, they develop an emphatic critical risk control system. And the restless organization, my ideal organization, they do what we call deep elimination of latent triggers of accidents. What is that? Well, when we look at risks in our organization, let's say that is your golden rules or your risk register, and those are all the risks you've identified, and you measure them in terms of likelihood, exposure, impact. The reality of risk is this. It constantly shifts in terms of likelihood, in terms of exposure, impact, and they constantly shift. It's not a static thing in the organization. It's not a hazard. Here's an example of the shifting risk of a fatal exposure. The guy hardly gets off his phone, but if he was sitting against that tree, different exposure, he would have been crushed. If he wasn't paying attention, he would have been crushed. If he was standing at a different place, nothing would have happened. If there was no one there, if the motorcycle rider didn't miss his jump, nothing would have gone wrong. All these things made this, at this moment, a random event. And this is when a final accident comes together. The way in which it comes together is random. But if you have a look at how do we look at risk in our organization? Most of the time we have a risk register, but what you see there in the yellow line is the ideal way of risk discovery. It is what I call the drunken walk. You've got to walk through your organization as if you're a drunk man, and not with a telescopic focus, in focus on risks. Because if you do that, you'll only see what is inside that focus area. And you may be doing a random walk in that, but what you don't know is what is happening all around. So we have to have dynamic systems with which we look at risk. And unfortunately, in most organizations, we have very static focuses. Now, our lens that I mentioned to you, our risk lens, is looking at overlooked risks, misjudged, incentivized, balanced, inherent, and tolerated, a completely different definition of risk that we used to do this with. Now, if you think this is all hairy-fairy, I refer you to my colleagues and friends at Deb Marine in Namibia. These people are mining diamonds off the seabed. Their ship is a processing plant and a mining equipment, mining piece. They suck from the bottom of the ocean sediment containing the diamonds. They put it through those process plants. They got 100+ people living in quarters on this ship for a month, and they have helicopters landing on them all the time. You can hardly imagine a higher risk environment than this. And they do it with great efficiency by looking at the deep elimination of latent triggers of accidents. The next factor is the depth of self-challenge, or the extent to which we are confident in our systems. And the choice that you could have made there, the worst choice of the lot, is our safety system ensures we all comply to rules. Now, if you have a look at compliance and confidence in systems, this is a multi-roller. Some years ago, we installed a proximity alert system on this multi-roller in Australia. Now, what I noticed before and after, before we put the system on, the people in front of this roller pushed the bitumen with their brooms. We're about 6-7 yards away from the roller, watching it all the time and moving when it gets closer. When we installed the proximity alert system that comes up with an alarm if people get into the detection zone, what we noticed is that people were actually waiting for the alarm. And they were not looking back anymore. They were inside that detection zone. And now they have become so confident in that system that one day if it doesn't come on, the alarm, somebody's going to be killed. Now, Diane Vaughan wrote a big book about the challenge of disaster and said in that, in an important respect, the fateful Challenger launch decision can be attributed to redundancy-induced overconfidence. Our children grow up jumping off buses with flags coming out, and they don't have to look because everybody stops around school buses. What is the effect on their confidence? Nearly killed. This is the problem of an organizations become this confident and then lose the capability to detect risk around them. The next one is an interesting one, is the direction of injury rates. When you looked at those three choices and you selected reportable injuries are decreasing and serious injuries are increasing, you're at the worst case scenario. Here is what happened in an industry sector in the United States. This is a huge industry sector, probably employing millions of people. And they've placed the organizations in the sector, these are large organizations, on a scale from the highest performers in safety on the DART rate. You see they've got very low DART rates, to the right-hand side, the poor performers on the DART rate. And then they looked at the deaths between 2008 and 2020, 12 years of data. There were 34 fatalities. Where did it happen? Now, if you don't notice the pattern, you must be blind. 21 of the 34 fatal accidents happened in the highest performing organizations, 62%. There's something fundamentally wrong here. And this is a trigger. If your organization is on its way to reduce its RIR and your serious injury rate is increasing, you are drifting towards this catastrophic situation. The ideal is this one, where your RIR is actually increasing, because it means there's transparency, there's great reporting in the organization, and your serious injury rate is coming down. We can't do both. I strongly believe we cannot do both. We can't do both because trivial accidents, smashing your finger with a hammer, those are very different causation models. Those are just linear little models. And a fatal accident in a complex environment has got a different causation model. The remedies for trivial accidents add complexity for serious ones. I'll show you in a moment what I mean with that. And eliminating small accidents in the organization also eliminates the warning signals that keep the system alive. If there's accidents happening, people are much more at alert. If nothing happens, we walk in front of buses. It increases the unwillingness to expose risk because people get blamed and management want good news. And it creates a myopic focus on visible known risks. It keeps us focusing on the things that we know about. We should almost make a choice. In fact, not almost. We have a choice. We can only do one of the two. And if you choose to bring down your lost time and your low accidents, your fatal accident exposure is going to increase. The ratio of upstream risk control. The worst choice there was risk controls are almost always focused on the wearing of PPE, retraining, or alerting of personnel. That's what happens in the system. One organization, administrative controls, and as you go into system 2, there's an abundance of engineering controls. The control focus in system 3 organizations are very much focusing on risk reduction, risk elimination, and dynamic risk optimization. So in very simple terms, if you look at an organization, at the one end, you got the values, beliefs at the high end, way upstream, which translates into the way we develop our plans, we measure people's performance, we provide incentives and decisions. That translates into various systems of metrics, and that creates the exposures in organization, behaviors, and most of the time we have great outcomes. Sometimes, rarely, do we have accidents. Now, this is a very static picture of an organization. It's everything but this. But just to show you in terms of where do we focus our hierarchy of control? Well, the elimination and substitution happens upstream in the organization, the way we plan, the way we generate decisions, etc. And downstream is the PPE level, the administrative control level. What we found in our data analysis, these organizations that we studied had a ratio. And the ratio was for at least every one risk that they eliminate, they will do 3 on the lower end of the hierarchy. Put it the other way around. For every 3 risks they control as a barrier at the low end of the organization, they have at least 1 at the elimination substitution level. There's a balance in a constant focus on reducing risk and optimizing risk in the organization. The type of compliance is the next factor. And if you chose employees tend to readily comply the rules, and still complying the rules, doing nothing wrong, the person has become rather blind to what is possible. The organizations can become blind like this. Piper Alpha, when they had a fire on that night, that fateful night, they sent out a mayday, and everybody was ordered following the rule to go to the accommodation block where they thought they would be rescued from. They all followed except 26 people did not follow that rule. Some were blasted into the sea, blown into the sea by explosion, and others deliberately jumped into the sea, realizing that the accommodation block is the worst case scenario because no helicopter is going to land there, and that's where the fire was, underneath it. And they died in the accommodation block, blindly following the rule, not judging those possibilities when they get to do that. And this is what I call the sigmoid curve. As you increase resources around safety, focuses on barriers and protections, you get to the level of compliance when the performance starts to flatten out. But at some point, organizations start seeing their serious injury rates increasing, and they start moving into the zone of atrophy. We are so obsessed, so gripped with fear, that we're unable to manage proactively our risk anymore, and we don't challenge ourselves. We need a little bit of the jaywalker skills at the pedestrian crossing. That's the System 3 organization. The last factor is the mindset of accident causation. Now, if there's an accident, the worker will quickly be disciplined. You're in the zone of the coefficient drifting you to potential disaster. Here are workers doing everything in terms of planning, job is, the slinging is correct, everything is going fine, but they have to get a bolt into the holes underneath that pump. Somebody's got to do it when they line it up. This is the job they inherited. This is the way they do it. And then a little slip, a little mistake occurred. They make it out. That incident was reported, cannot not be reported. Now, when you look at a situation like that, what is the first reaction? The workers didn't do the job right. And it was no different at Chernobyl when they first analyzed this accident and came up with one conclusion: it's a human error problem. And there's a huge focus on human performance, human error, and we have all kinds of new sciences. Neuroscience is going to fix up humans' brains. It is so far removed from reality. Our picture of shame in Canada is this one. The guy on the right is the guy who drove that loco engine. Behind him is the manager that he notified about the smoke, and behind him is the area manager of that company. But here's the shame. They were in handcuffs. They were criminals and criminalized. They were scapegoated as the cause of this whole accident. In the meantime, the problems were way up in that organization, the issues that failed. We have this focus on prevention of injury. And to do that, we want to change people's behaviors. Or we're going to change their brains now. Well, people react and respond in terms of processes. The processes react in terms of what systems we have. And the systems are designed in a response to the culture in our organization. That's the depth of the System 1 organization, System 3 organization. The System 1 organizations are operating at the front end and trying to swat mosquitoes as they occur in their work environments. There is an organization, this is my famous example, an organization that is clearly chronically unease. I call this the restless organization. Now, on this aircraft carrier deck, and that's specifically on the deck alone that I'm talking about, the planes land at full throttle and they have to catch a hook, a cable with a hook on the jet in order to stop it from falling over the edge. And look how this is going. They do this every 42 seconds. They catch the hook. The workers are close into this risk zone. They're standing quite close. The planes are landing every 42 seconds. This is an amazingly risky situation. And seldom do they have accidents. And when they do have them, this happens.
As this single-seat FA-18 Hornet traps, the arresting cable stretches to the breaking point. When it breaks, the plane quickly disappears over the side and into the water. Training saves the pilot, who ejects immediately. This yellow shirt miraculously jumps the cable as it whips under him, not once, but twice.
The restrained organization see those kind of characteristics as indicative of where they are. Acute levels of risk secrecy, myopic focus on fatal risks. And all of these factors that I showed you are different in a restless organization. In a restless organization, acute levels of fatal risk secrecy, there is a golden ratio of risk transparency. There is not a myopic focus on risks. There is a dynamic focus on fatal risk exposures. They are not overconfident on their safety systems. In fact, they distrust their safety system all the time. They do not have a black triangle. Their reportable injury rates are not coming down. They are actually going up all the time. And the serious injury rates are coming down. They do not control risks downstream. They reduce risk upstream in the organization. They do not have a cult of compliance. They have a culture of fearless challenging themselves all the time. And human accident causation is replaced with a causation approach that seeks it upstream. This is the magic of this kind of organization. And you have done this survey, and I'm going to show you the results of your organizations, all combined, averaged out now. This is what we found in the survey that you've just done. And here they are. The graphs work like this. Either the risk exposure is emerging, escalating, or extensive, imminent, or it's receding, it's reduced, or retained. Now, this is quite a different scale of fatal risk exposure. Now, let's have a look at what came out in your organizations. The first finding we had here is that by level or job position, the specialists in the organizations in this conference felt that the risks were on the receding. The fatal risk exposures in your organizations are receding. The executive managers, on the other hand, thinking that it was increasing. By type of industry, the mining and mineral industry employees in the survey said it is slightly receding. The transport people, it is emerging, and the manufacturing people in the survey said it is emerging. When you have a look at this survey here, people who rated themselves as behind other companies, but trying, you had quite an escalating risk exposure, and leading our industry, you were feeling that it was receding. People who said that they followed innovation and implementing new technology, your risk exposure is receding. And people who said our supervisors ensure compliance to procedures, you felt that your risk was actually escalating. So those were the various findings that we came to, and I'll give some more information back to everybody, but that's quite interesting, the results that we got. So the coefficient of chronic unease, is it magic or is it science? Well, I try to put together a formula, and the formula looks like this. And this is what the formula will tell us. It's a work in progress. Top left is what I call the golden ratio. That's the formula for the golden ratio to the power of 3. And the next one is the so-called random walk. That's a formula for the random walk, or the drunken walk of risk discovery. The third one is called the quantum Zeno effect. You can Google these things. Quantum Zeno effect means that if we don't observe a condition, this is in quantum mechanics, it starts to deteriorate. Think about your risk situation organization. If you constantly observe it, it doesn't deteriorate. If not, it goes. Bottom left is the injury rate direction. There is the risk control ratio, and there is what I call the culture quotient. All of these are very fascinating concepts put together into this one formula. Well, is it science or is it magic? Let's have a look. I'm going to give you another chance on the card game. Select, and these are different cards now. Select one card. Keep it in your head. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Your card is gone again. If you think this is magic, you didn't pay attention to anything I said. If you know this is logic, you know that the coefficient of chronic unease is an index that I think you can use and think about in how you can put your organization in a positive position where it can proactively think about risks and fatal exposures in the organization and save lives. In the final analysis, it's about people. In the final analysis, about us. And everybody in our organization has a commitment, and a commitment that is captured in a wristband that we all wear. And this wristband says, when was the last time you saved someone's life? This is the ultimate obligation of each and every one of us. And I hope that my presentation today may have been jam-packed, will have given you some directions and indications of direction. So if you want